Well, let me begin with a story of a hiker who was out walking one day when he slipped and fell over a cliff. Yet as he tumbled over, he grabbed a hold of a small branch. And as he's hanging there, he's just out of reach of the top of the cliff, and he shouts out, "Is anybody up there?" Well, just then this majestic voice booms through the gorge, and it says, "I will help you, my son, but first you must put your faith in me." And the hiker says, yes, I have faith in you." And the booming voice says, "Then let go of the branch." And after a long pause, the hiker says, "Is there anyone else up there?" Friends, this kind of captures the teaching of Jesus in our passage today. See, what Jesus tells us here is so counterintuitive, it's so upside down, that we'll be tempted to ask, is there someone else that can help with this question? And the question that we're looking at today is one that burns on the heart of every human. And that is, who is the greatest? And the reason this question burns on the heart of every human is because it's not actually an academic question. Now, what do I mean? Well, you see in Mark's account of this episode, from Mark chapter 9, we're told that the disciples were arguing about who is the greatest. And what that means is that the question there in verse 1 is not an academic question. You see, the disciples are not asking who is the greatest. What they're asking is, which one of us is the greatest? Which one of us is the greatest? And the fascinating thing is, Jesus doesn't rebuke them for this. Right? So these disciples have just asked Jesus in a very underhanded way, which one of them is the greatest? This is probably one of the most arrogant and pig-headed moments in all the disciples' career, right? And you would think that Jesus would rebuke them for such pride. One of my favourite lines from The Lord of the Rings is when Gollum calls Sam a stupid, fat hobbit, all right? Total put down. And you kind of expect Jesus to say something similar here, "You stupid, arrogant disciples." But he doesn't. Instead, he tells them how to actually become great. He wants them to be great. And he wants you and I to be great as well. Now, the reason Jesus wants his disciples to pursue a particular kind of greatness, or as he literally said, to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven, is because the kind of greatness that the disciples were seeking will only ever lead to deep insecurity and social breakdown. All right, if you or I pursue greatness in the way the disciples were pursuing it here, and that's the way our world pursues greatness, it will only ever lead to the kind of deep insecurity and social breakdown that is currently tearing the West apart. But if we can pursue the kind of greatness that Jesus suggests in this passage, it brings both inner peace and social cohesion. All right, that's what's at stake in this passage today. And I've got 3 simple points to help us find this inner peace and social cohesion. You can see that on the inside of your news sheet. So I want to begin by outlining how the disciples were pursuing the wrong kind of greatness, and we're going to look at what type of things this greatness leads to. So our first point is titled "The Problem with Worldly Greatness." We're then going to look at Jesus' teaching in this passage about how it is better to pursue greatness his way, which I've titled "The Benefits of Kingdom Greatness." And then we'll conclude with our application, which is how to get this kingdom greatness. So look, if you're the kind of person who thinks inner peace and social cohesion are attractive, all right, particularly as opposed to the alternative of deep anxiety, deep insecurity, and social breakdown, then please come with me as we look at the problem of worldly greatness, the benefits of kingdom greatness, and how to get kingdom greatness. And our passage begins with these words. This is Matthew 18, verse 1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, the reason the disciples are asking about the kingdom is because Jesus has been talking about the kingdom quite a bit, and he'll continue to throughout our sermon series. But like I said, this is not an academic question. It is a deeply loaded question, thinly veiled as an academic question. The real question they're asking is, which one of us is the greatest, okay? They were fighting over it, according to Mark 9. And friends, this is how we all tend to pursue greatness. You see, deep down, we all want to feel like we measure up, like we're acceptable, like we're lovable. Deep down, we all want to feel like we're great in some way. And our default position in pursuing greatness is to fight for it. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let me explain using wokeness as an example. All right, so it doesn't get much more relevant for 2022 than to look at the woke movement, but it's only an example. What I want us to understand is that wokeness is simply the latest example of what every generation does to pursue greatness. All right, so deep down, we want to be great, we want to be acceptable, we want to be lovable, but deep down, we know we're not. All right, we know that if people could actually see our thoughts, could actually see how messed up we are, they would find that we're not lovable, not acceptable, not great. And so what we do is we try to cover this up. And the way we cover it up is by choosing a characteristic that we possess, all right, and then we elevate that characteristic to be the most important characteristic a human can have. We say this is the most important thing a human can do or say or think, okay? So these are things like looks or success or popularity or money or family, you name it. We pick a characteristic and we elevate it to ultimate status. And what that does is two things. So first, we get to boast, right? I have the most coveted of characteristics, so I must be great. But our pride doesn't end there. C.S. Lewis says in his book Mere Christianity that pride is essentially competitive. So he says this, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next person. All right? And so what we also do is not only do we get to boast about what we have, but we look down on anyone who doesn't have this most coveted of characteristics. So, take the woke movement, for example. Now, you'll be forgiven if you haven't heard of the term woke before. It's only been around for about 4 or 5 years. But the phrase woke means to be aware of, all right, to be alert to be awake to the injustices that marginalised people suffer. Okay, so to be woke means to be aware of what African Americans have suffered. It is to be alert to what Australian Aboriginals have suffered. It is to be awake to what the LGBTQ plus community have had to suffer. And I hope we understand that that is a good thing, all right? It is good and noble to be aware of what marginalised people are suffering so that we can help alleviate that suffering, all right? But the phrase woke was considered a good and noble thing for about 5 minutes, okay? Within months of the woke movement emerging, it very quickly became a pejorative phrase. Now, here's the question. Why would being alert to the plight of marginalised people be considered a bad thing so quickly? Well, it's because very early on, the woke movement stopped being about a way to care for marginalised people and started being a way to virtue signal someone's greatness. Okay, so they took wokeness, a good thing, and a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people elevated it to be the most important characteristic a human can have. What they did so that they could show off, they could virtue signal that I have this most coveted of characteristics. All right? And it basically became a competition as to who could be the most woke. But alongside that competition, people started looking down on anyone who wasn't woke. And most people don't like being looked down on, do they? And so that's why it became this pejorative statement. It's basically what cancel culture has become, a way to look down on, a way to write off, a way to judge anyone who doesn't have this characteristic that I have. Now, the problem with pursuing greatness in this way is twofold. Right? So firstly, whenever we pursue greatness through a particular characteristic that we possess, we end up even more insecure. What I mean is this, all right? So to feel the need to virtue signal our supposed greatness betrays an already inherent insecurity, does it not? Like anyone who feels the need to show off, show off to the world how woke they are, for example, is already deeply insecure. But the problem is, how will we ever know if we're woke enough? Right? This is why people have been pushing wokeness to its absolute extreme. They're deeply insecure over whether their level of wokeness actually measures up. And so pursuing greatness through a particular characteristic, it's only going to deepen an already inherent insecurity. But the second ramification is it leads to social disintegration. Right? Looking down on those who don't possess this most coveted of characteristics is what is tearing the Western culture apart right now. Right? It's tribalism. Saying my tribe is better than your tribe. And so the woke tribe looks down on anyone who isn't woke, but now there's an anti-woke tribe. And the anti-woke tribe has elevated anti-wokeism to the most important characteristic, and they now look down on anyone who is woke. Right? It goes both ways, and it always has. Okay? Because this is how humans have always sought greatness. We fight for it. And what it's left with in the West is widespread insecurity and social breakdown. Now, Jesus wants to protect us from this, both as individuals and as a society. And he does so by telling his disciples what God thinks greatness looks like. So have a look at verse 2. He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. He said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Now, the phrase little child there in the original Greek usually refers to like infants, very small children. So we're talking like 3 or 4 years old here. So what Jesus is telling us is you and I need to be like 3 or 4-year-olds. Now, he obviously doesn't mean in every respect, all right? He doesn't mean chucking tantrums and having daytime naps and playing with Lego all day, though that would be awesome. What he means in this context is that a little child has no grasp of social status. All right? Little children have no concept over who is good looking and who is not so good looking. They have no idea about who is rich and who is poor. Little children have no notion over who is famous and who is less important. All right? A little child will talk to anyone, won't they? They'll go sit on anyone's lap. We need to train them about stranger danger. A little child doesn't look down on anyone. And the reason is little children are not interested in social status. All right? They'll happily stoop down and do the kind of things adults think are beneath them. They just have a different sense of dignity. And so what Jesus is saying here is the kind of greatness he respects, the kind of greatness God wants, is childlike humility. Childlike humility is the kind of person who is happy to take the lowly positions, as Jesus puts it in verse 4. So I watched a YouTube clip a couple of weeks back of the famous podcaster Joe Rogan. He's the #1 podcaster in the world today, and he was talking about Chris Pratt. Now, Chris Pratt is one of the biggest names in Hollywood today, and he's also a professing Christian. And Joe Rogan, was defending Chris Pratt from all the negative comments that are being made about him being a Christian. And so he was telling this story about how he went on a hunting trip with Chris Pratt. It was probably a whole bunch of celebrities. They went to this, some sort of resort-style hunting cabin. And he said Chris Pratt was just the friendliest guy who just talked to anyone. Like, he went into the kitchen, he was talking to the kitchen staff, he talked to the cleaners, to the guides, you name it. All right? And that is a Hollywood A-lister humbling himself to operate on the same level as everyone else. And Joe Rogan, a self-professing agnostic, was raving about it. Right? That's real greatness, according to Jesus. Now, we're going to see how to get this kind of greatness in our third point. But before that, let me say that this type of greatness comes with two enormous benefits. Right? And so the first is, true humility brings a sense of inner peace. If we can stop worrying about where we sit in the pecking order, what happens is all our insecurities start to fade away. Right? So I mentioned C.S. Lewis before. In another of his books, in the Screwtape Letters, he says this. He says, humility is designing the greatest cathedral in the world and being happy with it, but being just as happy if it had been designed by someone else. Right? So if we can achieve the kind of Christ-like humility Jesus is talking about here, it stops us feeling the need to always fight and claw away at having to display our greatness to everyone. Right? We just don't care about social status anymore. We have this inner peace about where we stand. And that inner peace leads to the second benefit, which is social cohesion. Right? When we stop viewing people through the lens of, what can they do for me? How can they increase my social status? Whether it be, commending me and having the right characteristic, or being able to hang out with the right kind of people, or just the kind of person I can look down on because they don't have this most coveted of characteristics. Whatever it is, we will actually be happy to mix with anyone, won't we? Right? Jesus says in verse 5, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Right? Jesus says the mark of true greatness is you will welcome even those who cannot give you anything in life, like little children. Right? Imagine what Western society would be like if everyone treated everyone else as part of one tribe, the tribe of humanity. So, we know what real greatness is, right? Childlike humility, and we know the benefits of this kingdom greatness, which is inner peace and social cohesion. The only question left is, how do we go about achieving this kind of kingdom greatness? And there are three things we can do to pursue this type of humility. And the first is to realise that all the characteristics we may be tempted to sort of elevate to ultimate status so that we can show off, they're actually things we can't boast about. The reason being, they are gifts given by God. See, there's a tendency in the world today to think that most of what I have achieved in life is because of me and my hard work and who I am, and God's helped a little bit. All right, so we'll say, yeah, God helped me a bit, but I got to where I am today because I worked hard at my studies. All right, I listened to my teachers. I surrounded myself with people who were good influences on me and got the right kind of mentors. I found a job where I could use my skills. I worked hard at my job and fought my way up the ranks. And I have worked hard to save and invest. And what I am today is basically because of what I've done. Yeah, God was involved, but it's mostly thanks to me. Now, the problem is, God says it's the exact other way around. Right? God says, yeah, you've helped a bit, but who gave you your parents who nurtured you? Who sent you good teachers who were able to tap into your potential? Who surrounded you with good influences and people you could look up to as mentors? Who gave you the brain that allowed you to work hard at your studies? Who allowed you to be born in one of the greatest countries in the world at arguably the greatest time in human history? And who gave you the kind of skills that are considered beneficial in this time and place to actually allow you to be successful? You see, friends, when we understand that everything great about our life is a gift from God, it completely takes away our ability to elevate any characteristic we have to the kind of status that we can show off about it. Even wokeness is a gift from God, all right? Not everyone finds it easy to automatically think about the plight of the marginalised. That's why the Bible has got so much in it about social justice. Right? Anything we might think of elevating to ultimate importance is usually not something we can boast about anyway. It is a gift from God. So that's the first thing. We can remember to pursue humility. The second thing in pursuing real humility is to instead realise we actually have nothing good to offer. Now, do you remember how the Sermon on the Mount begins? What's the first line in the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, what does that mean? It means you need to realise that you are spiritually bankrupt. This is why so many people find it hard to become a Christian, all right? Because to become a Christian means admitting we are completely spiritually bankrupt. You see, the default position for most people is to say, look, yes, Lord, I've sinned, but I've still got these redeeming characteristics. I can add a little bit to my salvation. And this is what Jesus is getting at in verse 3. When he says we have to change, right? He says you've got to change and become like little children. Little children know they have nothing to offer. They know they are completely reliant on their parents. That's why a little child gets freaked out when they lose their mum in the shopping centre. But the only way to become a Christian is to admit we are spiritually bankrupt before God. But here's the thing. When we can do that, we stop trying to tell the world how great we are. Because we know we're not. And when we realise we're not great, we can stop looking down on others. Because, well, they're probably a better person than us anyway. Social cohesion. Third and final thing we can do to pursue greatness is to realise that Jesus took care of our spiritual bankruptcy for us. Why? Because he wants us in his tribe. When I was at school, I was not great at sports. You know, when you get everyone lined up on the wall and you get two team captains and they pick who they want on their team, Brendan was the one left at the end. Now, you would think that would finish after school, would you not? But it didn't. All my mates from high school formed a basketball team and joined a local competition. Now, I would play basketball with them on the weekends. We would hang out, and my younger brother would be there as well. And they asked him to be part of their basketball team, but not me. And when I asked to join the team, one of the guys, who's actually still a pretty good mate of mine, one of the guys convinced the whole team to say no to Brendan, because Brendan's skill level would bring the overall skill level of the team down, which would make it harder for them to win. You ever had something like that in your life? Right? It hurts being left out, doesn't it? It hurts having people think you're not good enough. But do you understand that the cross is Jesus picking you for his team? The God of the universe wants you on his team. But the thing is, in order to get on his team, we have to pay our sins off. Now, I've used this analogy before, but to tread on a redback in Australia is a necessary thing, isn't it, when you see a redback? To tread on a puppy, however, is cruel, isn't it? To tread on a child is abuse. To tread on the Queen is treason. Sin is treading on God. And we have to atone for that. We have to pay for that. That price, however, is beyond us. It's eternal death. Do you understand, brothers and sisters, that Jesus wants you on his team so bad that he paid that price for you by dying on the cross? And friends, when we understand this, when that truly starts to sink in, do you know what happens? We no longer have to fight or claw to show everyone how great we are. Right? We no longer have to virtue signal how great we are to others, or be one of those keyboard warriors that's cancelling someone who's done something that we don't agree with. Why? Because you've been picked by the only captain that matters. That is real greatness, kingdom greatness. It's no longer caring about the approval of the serfs, because we have the love of the King. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child